Humanity did not evolve with the oceans in mind. It is only due to our ability to produce complex technologies that we've been able to cross the seas at all, let alone explain what lies in the depths. It should come as no surprise then that the oceans have played host to a plethora of bizarre creature sightings, from massive unidentified serpents to unconfirmed primate species. This is the first episode in an occasional series that will dive in quite literally to obscure sightings from beyond the safety of the continents to a blue world unconquered by man. Join us as we explore the possibility of sea monsters. I'm Tom, this is Niall, and welcome to the Campfire Archives. On the 10th of August 1733, legendary German zoologist Georg Wilhelm Steller set off on the ship St. Peter to map the coastlines of the Russian and Alaskan Arctic. This was known as the Great Northern Expedition, and it would last 10 years, introducing several major animal discoveries to the world of science along the way. Have you by any chance ever heard of Steller?
I haven't heard of Steller, no. This is a new one to me.
He was one of the most prominent naturalists in the world at the time he made his expedition, and he's really, really influential in the world of zoology today. So among the species discovered by and named after him include Steller's sea lion, Steller's sea eagle, Steller's cormorant, Steller's jay, and the now extinct Steller's sea cow. Having studied at the University of Wittenberg, as well as the Imperial Academy of Sciences, he was certainly a man who knew his animals. One peculiar discovery on the Great Northern Expedition, however, would stand far out from the others. So it happens the crew of the St. Peter were sailing around the waters of the Sumagen Islands south of Alaska's mainland. Just as the sun was beginning to set on the 10th of August 1741, Steller himself noticed the presence of an animal he didn't recognise floating in the water nearby. So, generally speaking, I'm not sure how much you know about Arctic sea life, but is there anything that you'd expect to see up in the north, middle of nowhere?
I might embarrass myself now, because I always get confused by the North and South Pole. But I believe seals?
Seals, yep.
Sea lions as well?
Sea lions.
Polar bears?
Polar bears.
And I wouldn't say penguins, because I think they're...
Yeah, they're Antarctic.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of big marine animals that live around that kind of way. You've got your whales, you've got your seals, you've got your polar bears, occasional brown bears, but there's nothing quite like the animal in question that Steller saw just floating around in the water. The animal was described as being around 1.5 meters in length and resembled a marine mammal, so something akin to both a seal and a small dolphin, but something was kind of off. The head was similar in shape to that of a large dog, and it had tall, pointed ears, forward-facing eyes, and stranger still, no visible forelimbs. Its tail tapered towards the end of its body and ended in what looked like shark fins. It was covered in what looked like a coat of thick grey fur with elements of reddish-white on its abdomen, long bushy whiskers projected from its face, which Steller likened to a Fu Manchu moustache. To Steller, the animal appeared almost simian, but there's no record of primates living in the Arctic, except, of course, for humans. Steller and his crew got a good look at this mystery animal for 2 whole hours. That's certainly long enough in my eyes for an experienced zoologist to determine whether or not he was looking at something unusual. As he watched the creature, it spent time bobbing up and down in the water in an upright human-like posture, carefully watching the ship with curiosity. The animal also began playing with a long stalk of floating seaweed, grabbing and juggling it around in its mouth like a trained circus monkey would. The creature was reportedly transfixed on the ship, looking at it with a sort of admiration and intelligence which is all but unseen in the animal kingdom, and it did so for a really great deal of time. It went under the ship several times, bobbing up from different angles and looking at the crew intently. At one point, Steller maintained that it even got within a few meters of him, and he could get a close look at his features. After 2 hours, Steller decided that he could register a potentially new species to science by shooting the animal, which was commonplace at the time, and then bring it back to shore for analysis. He opened fire on the animal with his rifle, but missed, which caused it to quickly dive under the water. It rose its head up from the waves once more and looked visibly frightened and almost upset. It managed to dodge again as Steller fired a second shot. Following this, the creature swam away and it was not seen by Steller again. Over the years, naturalists have attempted to classify what has become colloquially known as Steller's sea ape, but nothing has stuck. Some suspect that most likely Steller might have misidentified a northern fur seal, which is a semi-common species in the North Pacific. Those who have attempted to classify the animal as a new species have suggested that it might be an unidentified pinniped, sirenian, cetacean, or even a primate. So they are the orders of mammals that contain seals and sea lions, manatees and dugongs, whales, dolphins, and primates, so monkeys and apes. A lot of information there, but what are your initial thoughts?
So first off, you know how I love a story where the eyewitness is an expert. Here we have what sounds like one of the greatest naturalists ever.
Yeah, to this day, he's really respected.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. And he gets 2 hours.
2 whole hours.
Staring at something. Yeah. And it apparently passes really close. It goes under the ship.
At one point, when it starts to get confident around him, he's looking at it from about 2 or 3 meters away.
That's crazy. That's like the difference between you and me.
Yeah.
Like, I could understand with the misidentification, like they mentioned some kind of seal, fur seal, was it?
Fur seal, yeah.
I could understand in terms of misidentification if you were gliding past something and you happen to get a glimpse of it behind a rock. But 2 whole hours, so much so that he takes a couple of shots at it to try and grab it. I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but I assume he's going to know what a fur seal is, and he's going to know the difference.
Yeah.
He's obviously written an account of this and talked about how big a deal this is. Why is he risking his reputation for something he's not 100% certain of?
Exactly, yeah.
And the way he describes it, I can visualise, as weird as it sounds, I can visualise what to me almost looks like a seal in my mind's eye, but with the head of a monkey, like with a furry face, he talks about the moustache, almost like a big catfish type Fu Manchu moustache. It sounds so odd, almost human-like face. Really bizarre, Tom. Really bizarre.
So I think if we're looking at this from a purely scientific standpoint with no room for a bit of speculation, then it makes sense to suggest that he saw a seal. But like you say, can we really believe that a naturalist in such good standing and of such skill would make such an error? Even if he'd seen pictures of fur seals, he hadn't seen a northern fur seal in the flesh at the time he made his observation. But surely he would have known how to discern a seal, or even a species of seal. He was familiar with sea lions and other species of seal. He would be able to discern one from this bizarre monkey-like creature.
Absolutely. 'Cause seals, even fur seals, you'd never confuse one with a primate.
No, I mean you can see how they look vaguely monkey-like, ape-like when they're just floating in the water. But what would the possibility of you'd think that he would just recognize another species of seal or sea lion if he was looking at one from a boat.
Absolutely. And I go back to that point. If he's so certain that he's prepared to effectively stake his reputation on writing this account and publishing this account, you'd have thought he would have gone through that thought process and thought, well, exactly as you've just done, what's most likely here? Is it another seal? No, it's not. Because otherwise, I'm not going to spin this account about it having the head of a monkey.
Yeah. So one of the weirder points, I think, of his story is that the creature had no forelimbs. So if it was a primate, if it was a seal, it would have forelimbs. Maybe, I mean, some seals you can see they kind of like lay their forearms flat against their body as they're bobbing up and down or swimming. But he spent 2 hours looking at this thing and not once did he mention that it had forelimbs, which is a weird point in my eyes.
The fins of a shark as well.
The tail fins of a shark. So rather than it being like a seal where you've got like adapted hind limbs as flippers, it was like, I don't know, a caudal fin basically. So one that's forked up and down rather than left to right like a whale or a dolphin.
And again, a layman cruising past in a ship, getting a glance at something, yeah, I could absolutely mistake it. Perhaps flippers for a dorsal fin, the head for something completely different. But 2 hours, he must have been so certain to have wrote it had a shark's fin. And again, how bizarre. It sounds so odd. When you think of it, it sounds like a weird Frankenstein.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. And I mean, I've spent time around the coast. I've seen seals by harbours and things, and they are curious. They do kind of come quite close to humans. They do have a look at what's going on.
So that would be in line with a seal, the behaviour of kind of hanging around.
Yeah, it would. The only thing to me is that Stella seems to describe it as showing almost like a primate-like emotion, like it's got a bit more kind of emotional intelligence than a seal. You can see expressions on its face. He says that when he shoots at it, it looks frightened, it looks kind of disturbed.
Yeah, playing around with the bit of, was it a bit of driftwood or something?
Exactly,
in its mouth or whatever.
Yeah. Which again, you do see seals do, but again, you'd think that if he was noticing the way that it was carrying this bit of plant about, could he not see that when it opens its mouth, it would be a seal and not a primate? Strange. It's a strange case indeed. It wouldn't be the only time that this creature or a creature similar to this was encountered. However, the next sighting came nearly 200 years later in the June of 1965. This is when an explorer by the name of Miles Smeaton was sailing on his ketch with his daughter and his friend when he noticed something unusual floating in the waters of Alaska's Atka Island. His testimony closely matches Stella's, with a vaguely dog or ape-like creature bobbing up and down by the side of his boat. But unfortunately, his interaction with the animal lasted only 10 to 15 seconds. Smeaton noticed that this creature's face looked rather like that of a Shih Tzu dog, and that its fur was a thick reddish yellow in colour rather than a grey red. Stella's writings on the animal were published posthumously from his archives, and it is thought that he may have written much more about it, only those writings are now lost. It makes sense that if he didn't think that it was something worth publishing, he didn't publish it formally. He seems to have been frustrated in his writing at having to fail to capture a specimen and referred to it as an imperfect account that he had to be content with without a concrete specimen or a body. Stella himself, he actually assigned a speculative scientific name, Simia marina, implying that he believed the creature may have been related to primates rather than seals. And that kind of brings us to the end of the story. I mean, what are we thinking? Do we think it's a seal? Do we think it's a new species of an existing group of mammals, or something far, far stranger? Could it be the only fully aquatic or semi-aquatic primate species?
It's really tough to say, because my gut feeling is that this was a fur seal.
Yeah.
That's the most obvious explanation.
They're really, seals, I don't think people give them enough credit for how intelligent they can be. Whenever sea lions, they'll often swim quite close to divers, to boats. They really want to have a good look at what's going on. They're playful. They're good in captivity as well. You know, you can train them. They develop good relationships with humans. But then again, he was an expert.
This is it. It tracks behaviourally. But then everything you've just said could absolutely also be said of some monkeys and primates.
Yeah.
So that, to me, it could go either way. Like I say, I think I lean more towards it being misidentification, but
yeah,
there is absolutely a doubt cast over that. I'm not certain, because, like you say, we have an expert who gets an unfettered 2 hours staring at something, is so convinced that he takes a shot at it, writes an account that he publishes about it, puts his reputation on the line in doing so, because it's a pretty wild thing to speculate on, isn't it? A seal with the fin of a shark and the head of a monkey.
Yeah.
You're not dead certain on it. And again, this is not some crackpot. This is someone who, to this day, is highly respected, you say. So
he never really seemed to sway on his idea that it could have been a new species either. And I just think, I mean, I spend a fair amount of time looking at birds, looking at kind of wildlife in the wild in the UK. And if I see an animal, I can, even if I don't know, for example, let's say that I see like a bird of prey, I can tell from a distance that that's a bird of prey. I'm not going to say, oh, that's like a shorebird or a wading bird, because it just simply isn't. And I feel like there's quite a lot of distance visually between a seal and a primate.
Yeah.
Even if they're both mammals, they've got, I guess you could argue, similar faces to an extent. If I was looking at an animal for 2 hours, I'm pretty certain that I could identify it.
From 2 meters away.
Yeah. I know it's new territory for him. It's the first time that anybody had really charted the coastlines of the Northern Pacific, but it's 2 hours and the guy's an expert. That if it was anybody else, I'd think, scrap that. It's not worth doing an episode on. But the fact that it was Stella, the fact that it's a really knowledgeable guy who had named animals himself, I like to think that maybe there's a little bit of credence in it, but
absolutely, I totally agree.
Sadly, we may, unless somebody else can spot it, we may never know.
Yeah, and that, I think, is what hurts it slightly for me is that we've never... We obviously have this other account of this fella in the 60s, but that's 10 to 15 seconds. That's not a biologist.
No.
It could well have been anything. It could have been a passing glance at something, which was a fur seal.
I think if you're on a little boat and a seal pops up beside you, you're going to be startled, aren't you?
Absolutely.
It's an interesting thing to see. And the guy wasn't a naturalist, so I'm thinking maybe a seal popped up beside him, and in a moment of like, oh, what's that? He might have just misidentified it. But Stella's account, I mean, yeah, it's another one that to this day, the best argument we've got is that he spotted a fur seal, which, as I say, they can be intelligent and playful. They sometimes swim with their forelimbs tucked under their body. I just find it hard to believe that he wouldn't see it as a seal.
Yeah, and how do we account for the dorsal fin? How do we account for the face? It's just a really unusual one, really odd.
Really strange. Now, I believe today that you also have a story for us.
I absolutely do, Tom. So it's the 6th of August, 1848, and we're aboard the Royal Navy warship, the HMS Daedalus, and we're about 300 miles off the coast of Namibia. Now, Midshipman Sartoris alerts the quarterdeck to an unusual object rapidly approaching the ship from before the beam. Captain! The officers quickly gather. So the creature draws in, and it's unlike anything the men have ever seen. And what follows is the official account that the captain and first lieutenant write up and report to the Admiralty. So we'll begin with the quotes from Captain Peter McCuhay. On our attention being called to the object, it was discovered to be an enormous serpent, with head and shoulders kept about 4 feet constantly above the surface of the sea, and as nearly as we could approximate by comparing it with the length of what our main topsail yard would show in the water, there was at the very least 60 feet of the animal at the water's surface, no portion of which was, to our perception, used in propelling it through the water, either by vertical or horizontal undulation. It passed rapidly but so close under our lee quarter that had it been a man of my acquaintance, I should have easily recognised his features with the naked eye. And it did not, either in approaching the ship or after it had passed our wake, deviate in the slightest degree from its course to the southwest, which it held on at a pace of from about 12 to 15 miles per hour, apparently on some determined purpose. The diameter of the exposed part of the body was about 16 inches, and when it extended its jaws, which were full of large jagged teeth, they seemed sufficiently capacious to admit of a tall man standing upright between them. It had no fins, but something like the mane of a horse, or rather a bunch of seaweed washed about its back. Its colour a dark brown, with yellowish white about the throat. The head was, without any doubt, that of a snake. It is calculated that there must have been under water a length of 30 or 40 feet more, by which it propelled itself at a rate of 15 miles an hour. So there's the captain's account. Now here we have Lieutenant Edgar Drummond, and this is a diary entry written the same day that was also used as an official account. In the 4 to 6 watch at about 5 o'clock we observed a most remarkable fish on our lee quarter, crossing the stern in a southwest direction. The appearance of its head, which with the back fin was the only portion of the animal visible, was long, pointed and flattened at the top, perhaps 10 feet in length, the upper jaw projecting considerably. The fin was perhaps 20 feet in the rear of the head and visible occasionally. The captain also asserted that he saw the tail or another fin about the same distance behind it. The upper part of the head and shoulders appeared of a dark brown colour, and beneath the under jaw a brownish white. It pursued a steady, undeviating course, keeping its head horizontal with the surface of the water and in a rather raised position, disappearing occasionally beneath a wave for a very brief interval, and not apparently for purposes of respiration. It was going at the rate of perhaps from 12 to 14 miles an hour, and when nearest was perhaps 100 yards distant. In fact, it gave one quite the idea of a large snake or eel. It was visible to the naked eye for 5 minutes, and with a glass for perhaps 15 more. So these reports, Tom, were also corroborated by at least 7 to 10 witnesses, and these were all trained Royal Navy professionals. We're talking observers whose job it is to identify things like distance, length, etc. Half of them are officers, and they're all on this deck observing at the same time. And you can probably pick up from that how closely corroborated the two accounts are, from the diary of the lieutenant to the captain's official report on the matter. So, Tom, hearing those accounts, any initial thoughts?
First of all, I think it's fascinating. I always love when there's huge undiscovered sea creatures. There's some that we're planning to cover in the future of this podcast as well. And there really is some bizarre cases of just unidentified creatures on the surface level and right down at the depths that are too good to ignore. And this is a really good one. I really like this one. I like the idea of it being a snake, because snakes of similar proportions, they have evolved previously. They are known from the fossil record. We've got examples from across the past few million years. Paleophis colosseus, which lived in the Eocene epoch, that was around 12 meters long, or could grow to around 12 meters long, up to 40 feet. So still smaller than the one that we've got in this story. And another one, Pteris venus, was a sea snake as well. That got to around 15 feet, 4.8 meters. So the idea of massive snakes is not something that we can entirely ignore. They have evolved before. Obviously, the largest snakes today, they live on the land or in the Amazon. You've got the anaconda and the reticulated python. They grow to immense sizes, but they're absent from the sea. I'm not saying that there's not going to be a massive snake or a sea snake that does exist. I'm sure there are sea snakes of exceptional sizes out there. However, one thing that I think could be considered for this case is the idea that the creature in question is what we call a globster. Have you ever heard of that phrase before?
I've not, no.
No, so a globster, they're often the explanations of oceanic cryptids, big ones. They're organic masses that they tend to wash up on the shoreline, but you can see them in the sea as well. They are usually the bodies of big animals, so whales and big marine mammals. But occasionally they can look like they're covered in hair, and that is either the baleen plates of like a whale's teeth, or it's like ragged flesh after the sharks and the fish and that get to them. Maybe this could have been an example of a globster. However, what interests me is the description of the creature's face, so the snake-like, because you can, a lot of these things, they will just look like masses of flesh. They don't really seem to have faces, per se. And also the fact that it seemed to have been actively swimming. That's an interesting bit, because the globsters, they're dead. They just kind of float along, drift with the current, with the tide, or they're just on the beach, dead. Whereas it seems that both of these trained navymen, whose, as you say, whose job it is to determine distance and appearance of these items, they seem to think that it was swimming.
Absolutely, yeah. So to summarise, and I'm going to come back to your potential theory there, they view this, and it appears to be an enormous serpent or some kind of snake-like animal. Its head and shoulders are constantly above the water. And
you don't get that with a globster. You get that with a snake.
Exactly. The way they describe it, it's like a snake moves on land with that head just above the water. Now, the head is about 4 feet long, about 1.2 meters. That's what's above the water, the head and shoulders. But they anticipate it being about 18 meters all in, with another 30 to 40 feet of this creature being submerged because of the way it's moving and its size, which could exceed a total of around 90 to 100 feet.
Which is, we're talking whale sizes there. That's huge.
Enormous.
Yeah.
However, the diameter of the body is only about 16 inches, which is way smaller than a whale. Obviously, it's tiny. It's only about 40 centimeters. The other thing is the dark brown or yellowish white, brownish white colorations under the throat and jaw. That, again, sounds like a snake, a kind of dark brown on top, brownish white underneath.
And they did say that it was moving like a snake as well.
They said it was moving like a snake as well, exactly. And it was also doing around 12 to 15 miles an hour. None of this to me sounds like a corpse.
No.
And at one point it passes underneath.
Yeah, okay. And then puts its head back up out of the water, yeah. So I guess you can kind of rule out a long piece of driftwood.
Absolutely. The speed it was going,
Yeah.
and the fact its head is above the water, again, suggests to me this is something alive. They also talk about the top of its head being flattened. Again, like a snake. I can't think of anything else that would fit that description. It certainly doesn't sound like a whale.
No, it's very reptilian.
And the upper jaw projecting large jagged teeth and, tall enough to have a man upright inside them. The mane of the horse is something I find odd, because they almost describe it as looking like seaweed.
That's kind of what brought me onto the idea of it being a globster, because when you see images of globsters, they have this ragged flesh just hanging off them. I mean, I'm not saying that, it's for certain a globster or a giant snake, but I mean, it's there's a parallel there,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And apparently they do see a couple of fins, a back fin and
Okay, that's interesting.
apparently a tail fin
Yeah.
further back the captain thinks he sees. However, there's no obvious fins used for propulsion,
Right.
which again brings to mind a snake. The way the snake kind of moves and glides along, as opposed to something swimming using fins, if that makes sense. So the sighting obviously gains quite widespread media attention and fuels this public fascination with sea monsters, sea serpents, etc. There are skeptics, obviously, so notably the biologist Sir Richard Owen proposes some rational explanations, such as they've misidentified a large marine mammal, an elephant seal with a tail, something like that. Captain McCuhay strongly rejects these dismissals, and he insists that, as you'd expect, his witnesses, which are all trained Royal Navy observers, have a clear and prolonged view at this creature.
Yeah.
They have about 15 minutes looking at it, 5 minutes with the naked eye, and they know what whales look like. They know what seals look like. They've been around marine life all their careers. They're not hoodwinked by something in that way. In 2015, a evolutionary biologist actually comments on this, a guy called Gary Galbraith, and he proposed that what the crew actually observed was something called a sei whale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
However, looking at the description of a sei whale, it doesn't marry for me. Firstly, as we've touched on before, the length at the surface is about 60 feet. It could exceed in total 90 to 100 feet. Apparently a sei whale is around 64, 65 foot max. So even the portion out of the water is bigger than a sei whale. But it's also the diameter of it.
Yeah.
40 centimetres is so small. In no way could that be a whale.
No, I've seen whales bobbing up and down off the coast of North Yorkshire before, and you really get a sense of like width when you see them, and they are huge animals, and they're quite like, in the nicest way possible, fat animals as well.
Yeah.
They're not like they have to be.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And you're not a sailor.
No.
These people are around whales, like I say, all their careers. So it just doesn't make sense to me. That and the fact it's in sight for 20 odd minutes.
Yeah.
And it passes incredibly close to the ship. Like he says, if it was someone he knew, he could make out the facial features of them.
Yeah.
So they're getting a really close look at this creature.
I do have one more suggestion.
Sure.
And I'm more confident about this one than I am a globster.
Okay.
You ever heard of a giant oarfish?
No.
No. So remind me whereabouts they were.
They were off the coast of Namibia.
So giant oarfish are typically a deep sea species. They're huge, weird looking fish. They only really come up to the surface to die, but they're snake-like. Their faces don't necessarily resemble snakes. They've got very fish-looking faces, but they do have long trailing fins atop their head.
Right, okay.
And they've been reported as growing up to 17 meters.
Okay.
And when they die, as I say, they rise to the surface. Sometimes they'll stick their heads up. They are very snake-like, but 17 meters is the far end of the spectrum of oarfish sizes. Typically, they grow between 3 to 8 meters. However, 17 meters is not unheard of. It's been reported. I'm wondering if maybe it was, and it is a rare sight. And if you see an oarfish, you are lucky. They'd never enter shallow waters. It's only when they die. They still swim. They're still alive. Maybe, who knows?
That's a really interesting theory, because it would fit the diameter.
It would fit the diameter and the idea of like a horse's mane. They have these long trailing red fins that like stick out from basically what would be their neck.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The only part, I guess, where not even it necessarily falls down is the fact that they say a man could fit in this thing's jaws, standing upright.
That is a good one.
It's got a flat head.
Yeah.
And can an oarfish keep its head and shoulders out of the water?
I think they tend to, like, when they're dying, when they come to the surface, they tend to bob up and down.
Okay.
Some of them will like lay flat on the water.
Okay.
I don't think they would be. It would be quite impressive for you to see an oarfish rise out of the water and still say, "Oh, it looks like it's got a horse's mane," because I think at the point where it would be doing that, it would look quite ragged and visibly near to death.
I guess the only other thing is the size then. So there was 18 meters of this thing visible on the surface.
Yeah.
With apparently, they think, much more beneath.
Right. That's impressive.
It would again have to be the biggest oarfish ever recorded by
a long way.
By a very long way. But an interesting theory nonetheless. And we go back to the fact these are very trained men. This is their job.
Yeah.
They don't make mistakes like this. And we have about 7 to 10 of them, these trained observers, watching this.
Yeah.
But I honestly prefer your theory to the sei whale theory. I think that's actually...
It kind of just struck me then as you were talking, the idea of a mane. I wouldn't put it on a whale. I don't think, if they were confident that it was snake-like. I mean, these are they can grow quite thick, but they're quite like sinewy looking fish. They're really long, almost like an eel. I would be quite confident in ruling out a whale.
Yeah, I would totally agree. The diameter just doesn't make sense at all. And the final point is that these people's careers rest on them being able to identify things like distances, lengths, etc. This is what they're trained to do. So this entire crew are effectively putting their careers in jeopardy by revealing this account and putting this forward. So that's another thing. They have nothing to gain, everything to lose from talking about this in effect. But yeah, whatever the case may be, I really like your theory. But
it's a great story.
It is a great story.
I love anything to do with the idea of sea monsters. It's such an intriguing idea because it's a whole realm of the world where we're not supposed to go.
Absolutely. And I think of this oarfish, which I've never heard of, that surfaces to die, is incredibly rare if you see one. Who's to say it's not a similar situation with whatever this was?
Potentially. It's impossible to truly tell without concrete evidence what either of these sightings might represent. Are these the authentic, real deals of sea serpents and oceanic primates, or something a little more down to earth? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you'd like to reach out or even submit a story, you can contact us at hello.campfirearchives@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can follow us at campfire_archives on Instagram. See you there.